This story begins in New York in 1904. A fire station is alerted to an emergency, so the men in red immediately go out to help when they arrive at the scene. They realize that this is a very unusual emergency, because when they knock on a door, they are surprised to find that it is completely frozen, which even makes the hand of one of the firefighters start to freeze quickly. The others take action and break the door to see what is going on inside. You can see that the whole room is completely frozen, including the people who were there. However, they notice that a single person with a kind of armor is not frozen. He carries a sphere with him that when he tries to take it off, he wakes up and makes all the frozen people explode while the sphere closes completely, as it seems to be containing a kind of ghost. So we return to the present, and our ghost hunters are at work. Fitbit, or Maxian, and using their trigger catch the elusive dragon. However, the job is not complete until CIE uses the trap to contain the ghost. Unfortunately, the boys caused a lot of damage, and this left the mayor very upset, and he reprimanded them for their actions. In addition, he believes that Phoebe is part of child exploitation, as she is still a minor, so he asks her to stop working with his family. Finally, the mayor makes it clear to them that he will not stop until he demolishes the fire station where they live and holds them responsible for all the damage they have caused. So now Phoebe can no longer be part of the team, something that bothers the teenager a lot, but they have no other options. Gary leaves the ghost they trapped in the storage unit, but realizes he is having problems, probably because it is already full of many spirits, something they have to find a solution to. On the other hand, the former ghost hunter Reyes Tanz now has a program on networks where he analyzes everyday possessed objects, together with his young producer, which he calls a podcast. Many people arrive bringing their things. The stands can be analyzed. But a guy arrives with a rather strange object that catches the king's attention. He brings with him an antique sphere which he reveals belonged to his grandmother Stance, analyzes it, and believes that the brass material object was formerly used to trap evil spirits. He makes an inspection with special equipment, and the order begins to emit a great energy and causes the glass where it was placed to freeze and break completely. Stan is amazed and decides to buy the object. Meanwhile, the fire also felt a great energy, and it created several damages in the storage unit. So Gabriel asks Janine to find some kind of solution. The alarm sounds and the Ghostbusters have a new emergency. Phoebe also wants to go, but her parents won't let her, because she knows that until she turns 18, she can't be part of the team. This makes her very sad. As she can no longer do what she loves so much, the teenager decides to go for a walk in the park and play some chess to distract herself. However, she realizes that her chips are starting to move on their own, and as she knows very well that she is dealing with a ghost, she decides to continue because she is not afraid of anything. Even more so when the spirit appears before her. Alla Phantasma thinks, "It's weird that Phoebe doesn't run," and thinks it's great that they can get along. A little game is played, and the ghost is victorious in all the moves. The spirit named Melody reveals to him that he died due to a fire in a building, and now that he is a ghost, he will be the same age all his life, unless he finishes his unfinished business, which seems to be quite difficult. The next day at the station, a guy named Lars arrives to overhaul the storage unit. Also comes Winston, who reveals that after 40 years of accumulating phantom in the unit, he is already running out of space. He confesses that the fire station is like a kind of plug to the other side, and that is why they must protect it. Winston also reveals that they have already created a new storage unit, one of the largest in the world options to avoid S in the future. In the place, they also have a paranormal research center where they will investigate everything they don't understand about ghosts. In addition, they have created an artifact from which they can extract ghosts from any kind of possessed objects to finally send them to the storage unit also in the area and loose ghosts, but inside cubicles protected by protons to be able to study them in detail. Later, Art has to take out what is inside the brass sphere, uses the machine, and it does not come out as expected, as the object resists being opened that makes the energy of the place go away, making that. For a period of time, the ghosts inside the cubicles can leave without any problem. When Alarm's energy returns, he takes the orb, but it freezes his hand. Meanwhile, I went back to see Melody, and he invites her to his house there. The ghost gets to know the station and the storage unit, which seems to be what really attracts her. Melody reveals that she would like to be with her family, but she doesn't know how to do it. And it is something that, since she passed away, she is looking for the orb that freezes part of the city. For a moment communicates with Phoebe's ghost friend, who seems to be at her orders and does not have good intentions the next morning. The ghost hunting family has a problem in the basement as it is destroyed and frozen, something they can't find any explanation for. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, you are informed of everything that the orb brought is causing, as it seems to contain a malignant force, impossible to extract. To investigate more about the object they are looking for, Nayan, who was the one who sold the sphere. The guy tells them that the object belonged to his grandmother and that he had it stored in a secret 14 he discovered, which is made of brass and has more rare objects. By running the energy meter machine over the objects, they can't find anything. When it seemed like a hopeless case, the machine starts beeping when they are near Nayan. So they ask the guy to accompany them to their podcast lab, who curiously had a recording. D. Orby listens to the audio of his video and realizes that there seems to be a strange message next to Stan's, and Phoebe are looking for an old friend who can help us decipher what it is about. They arrive at the library to meet with Dr. Hubert E., listening to the audio. He mentions that it is about a dead language that no longer exists, takes them to see an ancient book, and explains that the orb they have in their possession is a magical prison that contains the ghost god called Baraka, a god capable of freezing everything that crosses him. It is also mentioned that there is a recording of a melody that opens the orb when they were listening to it. A mischievous ghost takes the melodic cylinder and escapes from the place. The boys go after him to try to get him back. But to their bad luck, the ghost gets into one of the statues and starts attacking them. Civilian manages to tear the statue to pieces, but to their misfortune, they are stopped by the police. The mayor takes advantage of this moment to put an end to the ghost hunters, arguing that they are a danger because they only cause destruction. Phoebe is punished by his parents, who call his attention to his behavior, something that the teenager takes very badly. When they get home, they realize that the police have confiscated several of their implements, and possibly the whole place will be demolished. Nadim, who was also on site, practices his powers, who reveals to him that because of his ancestry, he is possibly the last in a long line of firebenders orb protectors, preventing Garafa from making a winter apocalypse. Undoubtedly, this confession of Hannity baffled, and he doesn't know what to do. Phoebe goes in search of Melody, because with her he unburdens himself of his problems. The teenager decides to use ghost technology to separate her spirit from her human body and be closer to Melody. For 2 minutes, when she succeeds in doing so, her friend confesses to her that this is what she expected her to do, since she works for Baraka and needed Phoebe's human body to recite the words that would free the phantom god, the trap that Melody set for him. It is a success because Baraka is free, and the first thing he does is to recover his horns that were taken from him, and these give him power. After this, a brutal winter is unleashed on the city, freezing everything in its civilian path. He tells his parents everything, and now they have to hurry to get to the station and prepare for what is coming happily. Both generations of ghost hunters unite and get ready to face Garrick. Melody apologizes to Fabi for what he did to her, for he had grown fond of her. After all, Civil asks her to help him, but her ghost friend tells her that it's too late because Baraka is already at the fire station. The ghost hunters get their equipment ready, but it's useless. Nadim, in a good-natured way, asks him to leave, claiming that he doesn't want to hurt him since he is the master of the fire. Unfortunately, for lighter, it doesn't work, and everyone starts to freeze. Garafa releases all the ghosts that for 40 years had been captured, which are now all over New York. Six, determined not to give up with her amplified, brass-coated proton pack, tries to fight the evil god who hurls ice winds and begins to freeze her. Melody decides to help her friend and lights the match she always carries and makes sure that no one takes advantage of her fire powers against Baraka. This helps everything thaw out and start fighting the monster. The ghost hunters manage to trap him in the now empty storage unit, and he finally makes it to safety. The decision that Melody had made, he finally allows her to go to the afterlife completely and say goodbye to her friend. The ghost hunters are cheered by the people who are grateful to them. The mayor who hated the Ghostbusters is forced to accept them as heroes. Thanks to the support of the public, the Spangler family has no time to celebrate. For now, they have to catch all the ghosts that claw that released in the tea of the city, and this is the end of this story.
Preview.